Hello everyone, this is LT Kelser from the Cardboard Barracks. Today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the good but poorly implemented and major MMOs, starting with World of Warcraft. I am doing something a little different today. I'm not going to be putting up pictures or video, so if you really just want to put my voice off in the background so you can listen while you do something else, feel free. Starting with the good, something that World of Warcraft does really, really well is story. Just by questing, you get a huge amount of story. Like, it's almost always present, even if it's just little minor stuff. And you don't really see that implemented really well in other MMOs. I mean, you get SWTOR, but it's done in a very slow way. Whereas in WoW, you can just keep going with the quests. You get the story, and if you don't want the story, you don't have to pay attention. Leveling quests in World of Warcraft are also something that's done very well. They're rarely ever boring. I mean, yes, you still get the few kill X amount of bad guys, collect X amount of things in return, but I mean, sometimes it'd be like flying an airplane or playing as another character. I mean, it's really well done, and it goes from the level 1 to 90 content. The only exceptions would be Outland and Wrath of the Lich King content, but that's because that hasn't been updated in a few years, and I'm sure they'll get to working on that at some point. One of the other things that World of Warcraft does really well would be the amount of detail in their worlds. We can all agree that World of Warcraft does not have the best graphics. However, that doesn't mean they don't put a lot of detail in the world. Like, everything's just so interesting to look at, and there's just so much like architectural detail, especially in the later expansions like Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, and especially Mists of Pandaria. Just, there's so much little detail in the most insignificant things. It's great. However, unfortunately, with all this good, there is some bad. Starting off, classes in World of Warcraft these days feel very similar, and this wasn't always an issue. However, it's become an issue ever since the game began updating frequently. People complain, oh, why can't my class do this? And, raids would only bring, like, 10 druids and, like, no shamans just because druids have better spells. So the way Blizzard combated this was to kind of give classes a lot of similar skills and similar buffs, and you just don't get that sense of identity anymore. Like, I play a paladin and a mage, and, my mage feels too much like a lock, and my paladin feels too much like a warrior, and it's like, I don't really feel all that different compared to like other classes, and it's kind of just a little disappointing, but gotta handle it. Another part of the bad would be Pandaria itself, and I know people have really strong feelings, but it's not so much the idea of Pandaria, it's just how it's shown. Like, I was so excited to go to Pandaria. I'm like, oh, it's gonna look so cool. And I get there, I'm in this green forest, the Jade Forest. I'm like, this is awesome. Then the next one I go to is a green field. I'm like, all right, it's pretty. And then I go to a darker green forest, and I'm like, okay. And then I go to a brown field with mountains. I'm like, super. Then I go to another green field with big pink trees. And then the last zone is that same green field with pink trees, but cover everything with black and white fire. Yeah, not very visually pleasing. Whereas Outland had vastly different zones. It was awesome. And Wrath of the Lich King, sure, a lot of their zones had snow, but they all looked different and felt different. And they even had, like, Sholazar Basin to mix it up a little bit, which is great. And then even in Cataclysm, Hydro felt different than Uldum. Vashj'ir was just phenomenal. The only one that really didn't stand out was Twilight Highlands. But, 4 out of 5 isn't bad. I know what they were going for was just immersion and a sense of consistency, and Pandaria was never supposed to be this really dark place, but it just feels like everything just looks the same, and it kind of gets tedious after a while. Like, I don't find myself wanting to spend as much time in Pandaria just because it looks the same. And, the cities kind of suck. I have a feeling if they wanted people to stay in Pandaria, they should have just went all out and made another huge city, not these two little kind of half towns that have everything a city should have except auction houses. And they have portals back to the cities, but they have no easy way of getting back to their little hub town. Mages don't even have a teleport yet, so hopefully they'll fix that. And the other bad thing, this expansion at least, is raids and dungeons. We'll start with the dungeons. the dungeons just don't feel dangerous anymore. Like when I go into a dungeon, I feel like I'm just going into someone's house and cleaning up a little bit. Because take Temple of the Jade Serpent for example. You go there to quest and everyone's all happy, and then you just go in there, beat up some bad guys, and when you're first there, you never really feel a sense of danger. Even the Storm Stout Brewery, it's like, oh, beer, and yeah, like it's a fun dungeon, but it's like, it just doesn't have that sense of urgency. And I feel like none of the dungeons really in Mists of Pandaria have that urgency. I mean, even the bosses are just not that great. And we'll get to the bosses in a bit. Let's talk about raids. Unfortunately, raids have devolved into instead of having interesting rooms with interesting characters as bosses, we have square or circle rooms with a reskin of a mob. And the problem with Pandaria is that, and I thought this was going to work really well, is that since we have no central villain and these are all new lore figures, I'm like, oh, sweet, new bad guys. But the bad guys don't stand out. Like in the Heart of Fear, every boss is a mantid. Every single one. We fought a bajillion mantids. And in the Motion Palace, we have a troll, and then we have one interesting boss, which is the Elegon Dragon. And that looks fucking cool. But every other boss it's one troll or a reskin Mogu that we fought a million times. Same thing's going to happen with the Terrace at the end of the Spring Week. We have a reskinned Shah, another elemental thing, and, what else is there? I mean, it just doesn't have that sense of coolness. And, like, I know that we're supposed to hate these villains, but the problem is they're not our villains. They're the Pandaria's villains. And I feel like we're just killing them so we could become friends with Pandara, and that just doesn't feel as epic as, like, they're a direct threat to us. Because we could just leave Pandara any time and be like, oh, well, you're not our issue. You weren't our issue for 10,000 years, so why should we bother? And it's the same thing in dungeons. Like, all the bosses are just reskins of everything we fought before, and it just doesn't have that feel. I mean, take Noxramas, for example. Before, we get too far into the expansions, everything in there had a very unique model, and even though they were kind of really side villains, just the uniqueness of the models and the rooms just made everything really stand out. I mean, like, what happened to, like, the Terran Gore Fiends of WoW? He has one of the coolest models in the game, I think, and it is only used once in Black Temple, then we never see him again. Never. And I really wish we did, but, that's the state. And I feel like that we lost some of that uniqueness. I mean, look at Dragon Soul. Well, you have Deathwing, who's just a reskinned dragon we've already seen, except for his back and, when you're fighting him in the Maelstrom, but everything else in that dungeon is just a reskin of everything we fought before. And I feel like Blizzard's gotten really lazy with their unique models, and their excuse, they cost money to make and not everyone's gonna see them. But that's what made WoW so cool all those years ago when it first came out, was just that these big bosses had such interesting models, and you're like, damn, I want to kill that thing because it looks cool, and I know he's evil if I don't know who he is. Anyways, moving on from the bad, we're going to the good but poorly implemented. Now, these are good ideas on paper, but Blizzard has just done a poor idea sticking them in their game. First off is dailies. Mist of Pandaria especially is filled with dailies. And I know what they were trying to do. They're like, oh, well, we want reputations to mean something again. And we don't want you just putting on a tabard to, go get reputation. And that's great, that's fine, but there are just so many dailies. And the problem with dailies is that they're not as interesting as leveling quests. And you end up doing them again and again and again, and people feel forced that they have to do these dailies to get the gear that they want. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to raid. And that's really not good for the community. Like, I was kind of excited for dailies, but after doing a lot of them, I'm just like, I get burnt out. Like, and I did the Netherwing dailies. I mean, that shit alone was ridiculous, but I mean, some of these days, it's like the Cloud Servants, like, oh, it's going to be different every day, and not really. I've done, like, the same quests, like, 20 times now in the span of a week almost, and, it gets kind of boring. I think Blizzard could they could find a better way of doing these dailies instead of having all their stuff locked behind these reputations. They could have dailies, and they could have, like, these big sweeping story quests. I don't know how they can do it. Personally, I would like to see go back to the tabard model where you just put on a tabard and gain reputation, but the dungeons are so boring that I don't think I like that either. Honestly, I don't know how Blizzard can fix reputations. All I know is that they have to, and they have to really fix these dailies because they are not holding people's attention. The other thing, and I know we've all talked about this, was the Raid Finder implementation. It has been an interesting ride with that. And I like the idea. I love the idea because, as someone, I'm a full-time student. I have a job. I got to keep good grades and crap like that. I don't have time to be in a legitimate raid guild. So, I'm like, oh, Raid Finder, I could just hop in that and see the content. The problem is that it takes, Raid Finder just takes the specialness away from raids, and it's filled with douchebags who just don't care about anyone. And it's just a big mess right now. I mean, Dragon's was a mess. And, I think what Raid Finder should have done is keep the loot system they have now, keep everything the same, except you cannot fight the last 2 bosses in Raid Finder. I think that Raid Finder, you can go up to the last 2 bosses. And, people are like, oh, I don't have time and I want to see the content. I'm in that same boat with you. I'm in that exact same boat with you. However, I do not think that I should be allowed to see the big final boss or the big final 2 bosses because I can't put forth that time. That's what MMOs are. You have to put forth time. But I'm paying $15 a month to play this game. I should see everything. Yeah, not really. $15 a month is for your enjoyment. And if you think that you should have to see everything because you pay that $15 a month, you honestly shouldn't be playing. If you don't have the time to do what you want to do in World of Warcraft, then why are you even paying for the game? I mean, you really shouldn't be paying if you don't have the time. It's just that simple. But that's pretty much all I have to say about World of Warcraft at this time. I know that I'll be talking about it again very soon in the future. We'll be continuing with this series in the following weeks, looking at different MMOs. I'm not quite sure which one I'll be doing next week, so it'll be a surprise for all of us. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe to our channel. Watch my other guys' videos because they're really good. And thanks again. Have a good week.